Seventh graders, Kansas History, Chapter 5, Section 2. Let's get right into it. Today we're going to talk about Kansas and the Civil War. All right, we're on page 108. As Kansas was working to become a state, the United States was splitting apart and headed for civil war. The disputes over slavery and the rights of the states to govern themselves. The Confederate, or Southern states, wanted to preserve their way of life, which included slavery. Bad. Southern states began to secede from the Union. Eventually, violence erupted between the Confederacy and the Union. The Civil War began less than 3 months after Kansas became a state. Most Kansans supported the Union. They did not want to see the country destroyed after they had worked so hard to join it. Like President Abraham Lincoln, Kansas wanted to see the Union preserved. James Lane's Frontier Guard. James Lane went to Washington, D.C. as one of Kansas' first U.S. senators. 8 days after he became a senator, Southern forces attacked Fort Sumter, and the Civil War began. Washington, D.C. was in a vulnerable position between Virginia and Maryland. Both states were considering seceding from the Union. It became extremely important to protect the capital. James Lane was known to love a good fight. He arrived in Washington just in time to defend the capital. Shortly after his arrival, he began making speeches on the streets of Washington, D.C. At one speech, Southerners booed him, but Lane responded by saying, "I have 100 men from Kansas in this crowd, all armed and all fighting men, just from the victorious fields of Kansas." And the Northerners in the crowd cheered him on. Lane organized Kansans into the Frontier Guard. Might be kind of important. For the short time, more than 100 men arrived and provided special protection for the president. For 3 weeks, the Guard camped out in the East Room of the White House. Eventually, the Guard was no longer needed as Union troops moved into the United States Capitol. Let's go to page 110. Kansans at war. When the Civil War started, Kansas had about 30,000 men between the ages of 18 and 45. Total. That's how many men in that age group were in Kansas. Of those 30,000 men, 20,000 of them volunteered for fight for the Union in Kansas regiments. Not all of those men were from Kansas, but Kansas made an impressive showing in the Civil War. However, nearly 8,500 of those volunteers died as a result of the Civil War battles, giving Kansas the highest death rate of any state in the Union. Crazy. African American soldiers. At the start of the Civil War, African Americans could not serve in the Union Army. Eventually, the United States government changed its mind and welcomed blacks into the military. By the third year of the Civil War, African Americans in the Union Army were receiving pay equal to their other soldiers. This and other factors made enlisting attractive to African American men. Nearly 185,000 African Americans fought for the Union, and about 38,000 of those gave their lives. Kansas was the first state in the Union to enlist African American as soldiers. James Lane recruited soldiers for the 1st Kansas Colored Infantry. This was the first African American regiment to engage in a battle in Civil War. 225 men fought against 500 Confederates in Missouri. The Confederates were defeated. The 1st Kansas Colored Infantry was also the first black company to fight alongside white units. The 1st Colored Infantry gained fame at the Battle of Honey Springs. One Union general wrote, "I have never seen such fighting done as was done by the Negro Regiment. They fought like veterans, with a coolness and a valor that is unsurpassed. Too much praise cannot be awarded them for their gallantry. They make better soldiers in every respect than any troops I have ever had under my command." That's pretty nice of them. Civil War comes to Kansas. During the Civil War, tensions between Kansas and its neighboring state of Missouri remained high. Guerrilla warfare took place between the states. Instead of full military battles, Both Kansans and Missourians made raids across the border. One famous one, Quantrill's raid on Lawrence. Most of the 3,000 people of Lawrence were asleep at 5 a.m. on August 21st, 1863. William C. Quantrill, a Confederate guerrilla, and about 400 men rode into Lawrence just as the sun was beginning to appear in the sky. The town had heard rumors of an attack a month before, but nothing happened. That August morning would be different. The citizens of Lawrence woke to gunshots. As people came out of their houses to see what was going on, they encountered a violent scene. The Confederate guerrillas were shooting every man they saw on the streets. They also shot into windows as they galloped by on horseback. As the Confederates approached the center of town, they came upon the campsites of new Army recruits. Quantrill's men fired first into the tents of the white recruits, killing many. Next, they came upon the African American camp. It was close to deserted since many of the black recruits had escaped into the grasses along the Kansas River. As Quantrill's men broke into smaller groups, they continued to terrorize the town. Confederates were determined to burn down the town and kill most of the men and boys in it. To survive, some of the men hid in wells and under buildings. Others disguised themselves in their wives' clothing because the Confederates were not killing women. 4 hours after the raid began, at least 140 men and boys were dead. Some reported the number to be as high as 200. However, only one Confederate had died. The Battle of Mine Creek. On page 112. Missouri was a slave state that did not secede from the Union, yet it was home to many Confederates and Southern sympathizers. After Quantrill's raid on Lawrence, Order Number 11 was issued by the Union Army patrolling the border between Kansas and Missouri. The order cleared out all settlers of 4 western counties. The intent was to prevent many more raids across the border. A year later, the border became the site of a bitter battle between Union and Confederate troops. General Sterling Price led the Confederate troops into Missouri, hoping to capture the state for the South. He had orders to find new recruits. Price was also told that if he had to retreat, he should exit through Kansas. While in Kansas, he should take cattle, horses, and other supplies. As Price and his men moved through Missouri, word spread in Kansas that there might be an invasion. The state militia was called out. Price continued to advance towards Kansas City, where he turned away by Union forces. His retreat led him south along the border between Kansas and Missouri. Price had followed his orders and was traveling with supplies he had obtained for the Confederate Army. Eventually, Price and his men crossed into Kansas to set up camp. Price's refusal to let go of the supplies eventually slowed the group down. This allowed the Union Army to catch up with him. 2 armies engaged in a series of skirmishes. The decisive battle was fought at Mine Creek, where less than 2,500 Union soldiers faced down nearly 7,000 Confederates. The fighting was fierce, but in less than an hour, it was all over. The Union had won by launching a cavalry charge and broke the Confederates' line of defense. The defeat at Mine Creek forced Price and his men to abandon supplies and retreat. At least 200 Confederate soldiers died at Mine Creek. The Union troops also saw casualties, but upon leaving Mine Creek, Price's men purposefully destroyed supply wagons so they could move faster. The Union Army continued in pursuit. 3 days later, Price's army, weakened by their fight at Mine Creek, met their final defeat in Missouri. Women in the Civil War on page 113. Women were not permitted to serve in the military during the Civil War. However, their contribution to the war effort was invaluable. From the beginning, women organized relief efforts by making uniforms and blankets. Women also took an active role in raising much-needed money for the war effort. By the second year of the war, Union relief efforts were organized under the United States Sanitary Commission. The organization worked with hospitals to recruit nurses, donate food, medicines, and bandages. All right, that is the end of today's lesson. I want you to go ahead and do your worksheets. Good job, though. Proud of you. Let's see. Oh, okay.